ich bin Barbara Henderson. Ich wohne in Schottland, aber ich bin gebürtige Deutsche und meine Kinderbücher, 6 Kinderbücher, sind in Schottland veröffentlicht von einem Verlag hier. I'm going to say some of this stuff in English because this is the Day of European Languages and we're celebrating Europe. So I've written a book about what it's like to be an incomer into Scotland, Scottish by inclination, and about my 30 years here. But this book also profiles 30 other people from elsewhere in the European Union and celebrates their contribution to Scotland. And they are featured in this book, some of their pictures are included in it, and I am going to be sharing some details about their journeys, and I'll be offering some readings about my own journeys. Sometimes there is nothing for it but to be brave. Freshness Week was for people like me after all. I joined a pub crawl, another new concept. Binge drinking seemed strange to someone who had been legally allowed to drink since the age of 16. One of my new friends ended up sleeping on my floor one night. She simply couldn't remember where she lived. At the Freshness Fair, where students could join societies they were interested in, I signed on the dotted line for Amnesty International, the Christian Union and a volleyball team, and my very first Ceilidh, held in none other than the imposing and beautiful McEwan Hall, normally reserved for graduations. I approached on my own. The door was open and cheery faces waved us in, with traditional Scottish music playing through the speakers. I don't remember what I wore or which day of the week it was, but I do remember a Glaswegian announcer called Wee Pete. That was the moment I realised that some people, as in the ones from Glasgow, spoke a kind of English that bore absolutely no resemblance to the language I considered myself fluent in. Oh, true, he opened his mouth and sounds came out. Others nodded and laughed at various points during the short speeches, but to me, he may as well have been speaking Mandarin. I looked around. If anyone else felt like me, they were doing a good job of hiding it. Still, you wear your smile most boldly when it matters most. Every last one of the people gathered here was a potentially like-minded friend, a companion in waiting. Hi, and here's another little bit from Scottish by Inclination. This is now from when I was a student and I'd begun to make friends in Edinburgh. I finally settled into a place of not needing a label. If someone called me the German girl, I didn't resent it as much as I had at the beginning. Labels had simply ceased to be relevant. And I find that I liked it that way. My weekly and costly phone call to my parents on a Sunday afternoon connected me with a country and a culture which seemed increasingly alien to me. They in turn probably struggled to follow my enthusiastic rambles about Edinburgh. I had flown the nest and that was okay with all of us. On visits home, however, I often found myself dismissing the German ways, idealising my new country and my new culture. This country has a national health service, I boasted. Isn't that so much better than having to get health insurance? And people in Scotland are so informal, much more informal than the Germans. I love it. But the truth, of course, is that there are strengths and weaknesses to every system, every organisation, every country and every person. And deep down I probably knew it then. Nevertheless, Scotland had my heart. I was glad of the 4-year duration of my degree. I was young. At the time, it felt as if I had all the time in the world. Hi there, and another little extract from Scottish by Inclination. And this time it is when I was working in a newsagents on the Royal Mile as a student. That was my student job. With the shop located on the Royal Mile, we rarely missed an occasion. Behind the till, I was ideally positioned to see Prince Charles ride by in a royal carriage, for example. But dealing with tourists never failed to entertain. It was them and it was us. Despite my German passport, I was declared part of the us. A little odd, but lovely. Tony, my boss, hailed from England. He was hardworking and kind, as was his wife Evelyn, who I remember for her incredible warmth towards me. One day a visitor entered our shop and in broken English asked for 5 postcards, please. I showed her the selection. Stamps for Italy? She gestured. I sold her the stamps and airmail stickers. The shop was filling up, but she borrowed my pen and stood in the corner to write her cards leaning on the freezer chest. Once complete, she laboriously licked the stamps, fixed them on and made to leave. Where? She asked, waving the fistful of correspondence. Postbox. Red box. Just there. I gestured through the window to indicate the bright red Royal Mailbox. For a letter? She asked. For postcards and letters, yes, I answered, nodding and pointing again at the red box. Letter, okay. I go, she declared, and the doorbell rang out with her exit as I bent down to retrieve a packet of cigarettes for one of our regulars. But then something across the road caught my eye. The tourist had walked right past the red Royal Mail postbox and in one elegant movement slid her clutch of cards into the bin. Excuse me, can I pay for these now? The irritated voice of the customer in front of me catapulted me back into the present, and the next time I looked, the lady in question had been swallowed up by the throng of visitors to the city. It was only on my way home that I investigated a little more closely and discovered that on the grey bin there was a large inscription. Litter. I tried to see if I could retrieve the cards, but they were buried deep. I'm not proud of it, but I walked away. Tony laughed about it for a week. Several months before the wedding, we began to think about decorations. We had plenty of friends and were still heavily involved in the International Student Welcome Committee. It made sense to host a number of open evenings. Hey friends, we put on a little card that we handed out to everyone we knew. We're getting married. We can't possibly make all the decorations for the wedding alone. Come round to Rob's flat on any Thursday evening and help us. We will ply you with plenty of tea. And they came. PhD students from India were tying miniature bows for the order of service with French exchange students. Literature buddies joined medics to knead salt dough into candlesticks for the table. 2 or 3 fashioned large paper knots and bows out of decorative paper, which were in turn glued onto prepared pound shop trellises to fill the large walls of the Rosebery Hall. Folding of invitations, cutting of seating plans, assembly of dried flowers, you name it, we tackled it together. The beauty of getting married as students was that we could tear up the rulebook. We weren't in charge of delivering the perfect celebration on a plate for our friends. We needed them, and they knew it. As expected, there was much discussion of wedding traditions in different countries too, with candlelight and laughter in abundance. But I had no doubt about it now. I wasn't just marrying a man. I was marrying a country, and I was bringing my own with me. The wedding day itself went by in a blur. I remember getting stuck in traffic on George IV Bridge and having to walk down the Royal Mile in my wedding dress so that I wouldn't be late. Rob had joked that he wouldn't hang around if I was delayed, but he needn't have worried. I think most Germans are hardwired for punctuality, and my family, in particular, would rather die than be late for anything at all. During the bilingual service in our church, the minister absent-mindedly introduced us to the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Haas, my maiden name, only for the entire crowd to correct him aloud. That was followed by a cake reception in which my dozen cakes baked in the newsagent's kitchen took pride of place. Skip ahead to when I was a mother and my children were very young, and I wanted to bring them up with both my German language and my German culture. Now, this turned into a little bit of a failure, I'm not going to lie. I didn't quite see it through, it was difficult. But here's a little bit from Scottish by Inclination about one of my more valuable efforts. I started a German parent group, and other parents who were bringing their children up with German joined. During Advent, We baked traditional German biscuits and listened to Weihnachtslieder. German Christmas to this day is the aspect of my birth country I miss the most. There is a glare and a glitter to the Christmas atmosphere here at times. Germans prefer the glow and the glimmer. Subtle, quiet, reflective, peaceful, even as a child, those were the qualities which appealed to me in the festive season. Both have their place, but I really wanted my children to experience what I had as a child. Out with commercialism, in with homemade presents. This is what we wanted. As soon as the children got older, we wouldn't have much opportunity to opt out. Even now, we don't let anyone loose on their presents all at once. We do it the German way. One person and one present at a time to be admired by all before moving on to the next. Unwrapping presents can take all evening, and I wouldn't want it any other way. Even in the early years of the German group, as we unimaginatively called ourselves, there was a trend. The kids would gather for the food or the activity, and they would say Danke and Bitte. But as soon as we let them loose to play, they reverted to the language of the school playground. Speak German, I'd remind them from afar, only to be joyfully ignored. Hi, and here is a little bit from Scottish by Inclination about when I was a published author and I was approached by a Turkish TV station to talk about World Book Day. To this day, I have no idea why they asked me. I still think it must be a case of mistaken identity, but this is what happened in the aftermath. Perfect, said the voice at the other end of the Skype call resolutely. The interview aired on World Book Day itself. I was busy visiting a school, but I managed to track down the recording on the TRT World YouTube channel. They said, in celebration of World Book Day, Showcase spoke to Scottish author Barbara Henderson. We look into the importance of the day and how it's commemorated by children around the world. Guilt washed over me. They hadn't explicitly asked me my nationality. I'd forgotten to mention it, and now it was too late. The programme had gone out. They had called me Scottish. Had I lied implicitly? Had I done wrong? I agonised before remembering the slogan I had heard on TV, Scottish by Inclination. Perhaps I wasn't an imposter. I wrote books in one of the languages of Scotland about Scottish history, published by a Scottish publisher. The books were widely studied in Scotland's schools, and I had lived in Scotland for more than a quarter of a century. I had Scottish children, a Scottish husband, and I had answered my interview questions in fluent English with a hint of a Scottish accent. Enough, I decided. If someone wants to call me a Scottish author, I will let them. It was a liberating thought.